I definitely let the property to you with a toilet seat. Where the hell is the toilet seat gone? Hi guys, and welcome back to the Property Hustle. So I thought I'd do more of a story time episode today. One, because I haven't done one in a while. Two, because I really want to spill the tea. And three, because I've always said that I'd be open and honest with you guys as to my property journey, what I'm going through, and hopefully let you guys learn from the mistakes that I make as I go along. In today's episode, I'll be talking about the very, very difficult tenant that I've recently managed to get out of my property, and how I was able to get 100% of the deposit back from that tenant when they left the property. So sit tight, grab your cup of tea if you need, and yeah, let's get into this. Okay, so before I launch into the story time, I feel like I need to give you the backstory. So in September 2018, I was changing tenants in my property in Nottingham, and I'd marketed the property on open rent, and I'd booked a bunch of viewings. At some point during the day, I had this couple come in who were really interested in the property. They loved it. They said they wanted to take it, and they actually came super prepared, guys. They brought all their documentation, everything that they needed. They had their copies of their passport, employer's reference, last month's paycheck. They were ready, and I thought, wow, this is amazing, this is great. I've found the dream tenants. They've come ready, they've come prepared, they want to take the property. And being that I managed the property from afar, for me that was great, because it meant that I'd got to meet the tenants, I could sign the agreements there and then. They were willing and ready to pay the deposit and first month's rent right there and then. So I thought, great, I can head back to London, which I did, and we signed the lease agreement electronically. And for the first few months, I thought I'd literally won the tenant lottery. I was like, I've got tenants who aren't belling off my line, telling me that there's issues with the property, and they're paying their rent on time. I was like, okay, this is great. But yeah, sod's law, month 5, they reached out to me and basically said that a partner was too shy to ask, but he was in between jobs at the time and wasn't going to be able to make the rent on time because of the way that he was going to be paid from his last job and then his current job, and there was basically going to be a bit of a delay in their cash flow and the money. So what I loved about this was that they'd contacted me ahead of time and they had communicated this with me. So then, me being the landlord, and I think as landlords we have a duty to be reasonable with our tenants and try and work with our tenants where possible. So I said, okay, great, thanks for communicating this with me. Let's work out a payment schedule that you guys are able to meet. So they suggested that they pay half rent at the beginning of the month and then the half rent at the end of the month when they had money coming in from the new job. So I said, okay, that's fine. I made sure that we got it in writing, because guys, that's one thing you should always make sure you do. Get any changes to your agreement with your tenants, get it in writing. So we got it in writing on email, and then yeah, that 5th month, they paid half rent at the beginning, half rent at the end. Everything was cool. A few months later, they were fine, rent was being paid on time. They then contacted me, I think in May of last year, to basically say that they were going to struggle to pay rent again, and they wanted to set up a rent payment schedule. And I asked them, I was okay, well, what's the situation? Let me understand. They basically said, oh, we're off to Romania for our wedding and our baby's baptism, and we essentially need the money for that. And I was like, okay, well, to me, I just felt like the first situation where they were in between jobs, I get it, money isn't coming in, you need to try and spread your cash flow throughout the month. This situation, to me, I was like, okay, so if you can afford the flight to go out to Romania, to do your wedding, to, all of this, I feel like in life, maybe it's just me, I don't know, but in life, if I've got a big event plan that's going to cost a lot of money, I always try and make sure that my priorities first and foremost are paid, and that is a roof over my head and food in my fridge. But clearly some people's priorities are just not the same as other people's priorities, you know what I mean? So I was like, okay, well, they're coming to me, they're saying they're going to be struggling. There's not much I can really do, because it's not like they're saying they're not going to pay me rent. They want to try and figure out how they can pay me rent. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna let this slide. And I just said to them, you know, tell me a schedule that would, you know, you would be able to meet and keep. And so they said, okay, can we have first month, half month rent, second month, half month rent, and then on the third month, towards the end of the third month, we'll catch up on all the rent payments. So I said, okay, but you do realise if you're paying half rent month 1 and half rent month 2, that means you're already behind on 1 month's rent. And then you're telling me on the third month you're gonna pay off that 1 month rent that you still owe, and then pay an addition for that third month as well. So that's essentially 2 months worth of rent that you're gonna be expected to pay at the end of the third month. I said to them, like, are you sure you're gonna be able to make that? Like, are you sure? Is that something you can definitely do? Like, let's work out something that you can do. And they were adamant. They were like, yes, this is what we can do, because by that time we'll be back in the UK, my husband will be working, and we can make those payments. And I said, you know what? Okay, let's get it in writing. So we got it in writing, and I set it out, and everyone was clear. They paid the half rent for month 1, that was fine. Month 2 comes now. I'm in Santorini with the girls. That was a good trip. I was in Santorini, living my best life, you know, celebrating my friend's birthday. I get a message from the tenant on WhatsApp saying they're not going to be able to pay that second month's half rent. And I mean, you just can't write this stuff. Like, I knew this was going to happen. I absolutely knew this was going to happen. And I said to them, well, look, like, we had this in agreement. I voiced my concerns about you paying rent, not being able to pay rent. And I mean, at that point, there's not much I can do. I'm not even in the country. So I said, you know, well, when are you going to be back from Romania? And they said, oh, not for another few weeks. And I said, well, hang on, how long have you already been there? And they said, oh, we've been here about 4 weeks. And I said, well, you do realise there's a clause in your agreement that says if you're going to be away from property for more than 3 weeks, you need to let me know, because you can't just have a property sitting empty. Squatters could come in, you know, anything could happen, and I don't know about it because you're not there. Anyway, so I asked permission. We were on the phone on WhatsApp call, and I said I asked permission to go, when I was back in the UK, to go up to the property to make sure everything was okay and check it out. And we also agreed a deferred date, basically an addendum to the already changed rent schedule. And we basically agreed that they'd pay a bit later. When I got back to the UK, I went up to Nottingham. Let me take a moment to just think about how I'm going to put this, because what I found when I went up there was just not something that I would have, 1, expected from a couple with a young child, and 2, would have wanted to see in my own property. Now, I get it. As a landlord, you know, when you're investing in property, I always tell this to like my mentees or people that want to get into the property game. You have to be like very unemotional with your properties, because at the end of the day, tenants are going to live how they want to live. And, you know, if they're a hoarder, they're a hoarder. If they're an interior designer, they're an interior designer. Like, you can't, you know, choose how your tenants treat your property. What you can do is make sure it's all written in the lease agreement as to how they should keep the property up and how they should return the property to you. Anyway, I get to the property and it is messy, doesn't quite cut it. It was quite bad. I get in there was clear evidence that they had another person living in the property with them that they hadn't notified me about. There was evidence that they'd been smoking. I could smell the smoke very heavily, like, in the property. There were the toilet, you guys, like, their toilet had no toilet seat. And I'm like, I definitely let the property to you with a toilet seat. Where the hell has the toilet seat gone? So there was issues with the toilet seat. There was what appeared to be a leak that had dried because they'd been away from the property so long, but there was clearly a leak that had started when they were in the property that they hadn't let me know about, and it looked like it was coming from the bathroom going down to the dining room. And so I was like, okay, well, that's something that I've got to then sort out. Anyway, so putting all of that aside, they came back to the UK, you know, we sorted things out, they were paying their rent on time. Now it was coming up to their lease end, and personally as a landlord, I was not prepared to renew their lease for another year, because for me, I was like, well, I know they've already had issues paying rent. The rent that they were paying was actually below the market rent, and you know, being a landlord, it's a business, you know, when each year you have to reassess your rent and see if you can up it. So I let the tenant know this, and I was like, you know, I'm gonna, you know, the rent will be increasing as of September. Do you want to continue your lease? And they said to me at the time, they said, no, we'd rather look for somewhere cheaper. I thought to myself, to find somewhere cheaper for a 2-bed in that particular area, and I know they want to stay in that area because they've got family around there, I was thinking, you're not going to find anything. But anyway, they handed in their notice, they said they were going to leave, and I started marketing the property. Got it up, started looking for a tenant, had found someone willing to move in. And then like 2 or 3 weeks later, they messaged me being like, really sorry, we can't find anywhere, we want to stay in the property. So now I'm like, well, I've just spent money marketing this property and you're saying that you don't want to leave anymore. But I mean, I can't do anything at that point. I can't really serve them notice because I need to have grounds to serve them notice. So I said, okay, fine, you're welcome to stay, but in order to protect my interest in the property and also protect your interest, because I know they wanted to continue to look for somewhere new to go. So I said to them, well, if you sign a new lease agreement, you're going to be tied in for, you know, a minimum of 6 months. So if you want that flexibility, it's probably best we let the current agreement roll over onto a periodic tenancy. And I made it very clear to them. I said, if you roll over to this periodic tenancy, there's a clause in the agreement that says, if you go into a periodic tenancy and you miss rent payments by more than 7 days, I have the right to serve notice on you, to serve your 2 months notice. By this point, I'm pretty much expecting each month for them to come to me and say they're going to miss their rent payment. Anyway, so I said, I made it very clear to them. I put it in big, bold red light, and I highlighted it in the agreement. I said, this is what's going to happen. Are you okay with this? Are you okay with the rent increase? I was dealing with the husband who was the lead tenant, and he said, yeah, I'm fine, let's continue on that basis. So we did. We let it roll over. They continued to pay their rent on time. They were paying the increased rent. Now, early this year, they contacted me again and they were like, oh, we're going to go to Romania. We have our cousin, we want our cousin to move in and to live here, and are you okay with that? And I was like, no, I'm not okay with that. I have not had the opportunity to meet your cousin. I don't know their situation. I haven't run a reference check on them. But besides, the agreement is under your name. So even if you leave and your cousin comes in and I agree to that, you still have to guarantee that rent. If your cousin doesn't pay the rent, I'm coming after you guys. And when I said it like that, they were like, oh, we'll only be gone for 4 months. I was like, only be gone for 4 months? Are you serious? If you're going for 4 months, you're basically leaving the country. So I need you to leave my property. Anyway, so I stood my ground. I didn't cave into them at all. And they were like, okay, fine. So they handed in their notice, and I began to market the property. Now, once they left the property vacated, I went up there, like the sight that met me, to be honest, because I'd gone there sort of mid of last year, I kind of was expecting it to be in just as bad a state. To be fair to them, they had tried to tidy up a little bit, but there were still drawings on the wall from their kid. They'd stuck some random sticky back plastic thingy-majiggy in my kitchen and in my bathroom that they hadn't asked for permission for, and they hadn't. Even if they hadn't asked for permission for it, they're meant to return it back to what it was before, but it wasn't that. Oh guys, I forgot to tell you, last year when I went up there, they didn't the fridge that they had was not the fridge that I supplied the property with. So that was an issue as well. And they'd left the property so when I gave them the property, or when they moved in, the property was completely empty. It had just been redecorated. I went in at the end of the tenancy. They had left a bunch of junk. I'm probably gonna have to put some pictures to kind of show you. It was like full of junk, which I then had to essentially pay to get cleared out. I had to pay for a deep cleaning service. Like when I say deep, I mean, I pay for a cleaning service every time a tenant moves out anyway, but this was like deep, 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 because honestly, the stench from the cigarettes that they'd clearly been smoking indoors, even the walls had tinged a bit yellow as well, so I had to get a complete paint job done, deep cleaning of the carpets to try and remove that smell, because I was not about to pay for a whole new set of carpets. But yeah, so all of that cost me close to about 800 quid, I think. Was it 800? Somewhere around there. And so I was just like, nah, this is ridiculous. Like, I can't give them their deposit back. They have clearly let the property fall into a state of disrepair. They have on a number of occasions been in breach of their lease agreement. So I decided, like, I was like, nah, I'm gonna have to chase this. I'm really gonna have to chase this. And what's funny is that they tried to come at me and were like, oh, you know, you haven't been keeping the property well. And I had to go back to them with like receipts in terms of, so in fact, let me get my phone and actually read out what they said to me and my response to them, because you can't make this stuff up, guys. So I said, look, I've carried out work and repairs on the property as is required and listed in the landlord's obligation within the lease agreement that was signed by all parties at the beginning of your tenancy. Please refer to the tenant's obligation in your lease agreement, which your husband has on email, where it clearly states that the tenant is obligated to keep the property, and I put this in commas because I was actually quoting, to keep the interior of the premises and the landlord's contents in as good and clean state of repair and condition and decoration as the premises were in the commencement of the term. You may not own the house, this is what I said, you may not own the house, but you signed an agreement stating you would keep the property and contents in good repair. The reason why I said you may not own the house is because she was saying, it's not my house to be doing work on. I was like, wow, okay. That's why I had to like make it very clear. You don't own the house, but you signed the agreement stating you would keep the property and contents in good repair. The workmen advised that the toilet seat was missing and the fridge is not the fridge that was supplied at the beginning of the tenancy. They've also advised that there is another adult living with you. Your tenancy agreement states that you must seek permission from the landlord to take in any lodger, paying guest, or person staying on either a permanent or semi-permanent basis. So they're basically arguing that I haven't looked after the property. I was like to them, well, look, I am not about to pay this deposit back. What happens with the third-party deposit protection scheme is, as a landlord, you are obligated and legally bound to protect your tenant's deposit elsewhere. You can't just keep your tenant's deposit. So that deposit had been kept with DPS. And so when I contacted them to get all the deposit back, they said, okay, state your reasons why. I stated my reasons why, which was basically cleaning service. I had to redecorate, I had to clear the property. And I put the prices of the cost of each of those jobs. The tenant originally refused, and when I contacted him and spoke to him, he went off on me. He was swearing at me, he was screaming at me. He was like, you've been an awful landlord, you entered the property without my permission. And that's when I brought up that telephone conversation where he had given me the permission to do so. So that shut him up. And then, oh, it can't cost that much, there was nothing really wrong with the property, you're being unscrupulous, you're trying to take money from us. And I said, well, no. And I sent him the invoices, I sent him the receipts, and I said, look, if you look here, this is how much I've spent on clearance, this is how much I've spent on getting a deep clean of service. This is like, I literally itemized it all out. And I think once he saw that, and you know, he couldn't really dispute it. And then he started backtracking and was like, oh, okay, well, in which case, like, let's try and come to some kind of agreement. Like, maybe we can go half and half and you can give me half the deposit back. And I said, well, no, like, I'm already out of pocket because your deposit doesn't even cover the amount of money that I've spent to get it back up to scratch. And so I kept hardline. And what I did was I remained calm, and I remained like I didn't get riled up, because he was like going at me and swearing. Like, I'm not someone that swears. I don't like swearing at people. I don't like being sworn at. But I just kept my cool. I stayed really calm. And I think eventually he had to calm down himself. In the end, he was like, okay, fine, whatever, like, I'll accept it. So I went back into DPS, requested my deposit back, and sure enough, he accepted it. So yeah, like, I managed to get all of my deposit back. I never thought I'd ever be in a position where I'd had to ask for my deposit back. My first tenant, I gave them their deposit money back, like they'd left the property in a pristine condition. So with this tenant, like, I'm glad that I stood my ground and that they didn't like walk over me, because I felt like towards the end of the tenancy anyway, I felt like they were basically taking advantage of me and taking advantage of my like niceness as a landlord. Like I do try to be as reasonable as possible, and I just felt that they'd taken the biscuits. So yeah, that's essentially end of story time. That's how I managed to get the tenant out and managed to get all of the deposit money back. So in terms of lessons that I've learned from this, I think there's probably about 5. The first lesson being, be very wary of tenants who are in a rush to move in or seem very excited to come into the property. You don't know what they're rushing away from. So make sure you take your time to vet your tenants properly. Lesson number 2, inventory checklist. Guys, when I tell you, the inventory checklist that I take at the beginning of every tenancy came so in handy when I was trying to dispute the deposit agreement. When you're taking that inventory, make sure you take pictures. So when you've done your property up and you've refurbished it, take pictures there and then, because those pictures not only will be your proof as to what the property looked like when the tenant moved in, they'll also help you with remarketing the property when the tenant is due to move out. So the tenant could still be in the property and you could start your marketing process early using the pictures from before they moved in. Lesson number 3, any kind of change, any kind of communication that you have with the tenants, make sure it's in writing, especially when there's a change in, like, let's say the agreement or the rent pay schedule. Make sure that's in writing and documented, because if it ever comes to a point where you have to go to legal proceedings, you want to be able to have that as evidence to say, this was what was said and this was what was agreed. And to that point, if you're keeping written communication, you need to make a log of all telephone conversations as well, because I think that's where people get tripped up. Telephone conversations, note the date, note the time, and summarize what was agreed or what was said in that conversation. Send it to the tenant as well so they have a copy, because my tenant was trying to deny that they'd given me permission to enter the property when they were in Romania, and I was like, you definitely did, we're on the phone, and I explained to you the reason why I needed to go in, because you'd been away for so long. So yeah, like, keep records of that. Lesson number 5, if you're ever in a position where you have to dispute a deposit claim, don't do what I did, which was go straight to the third party deposit protection scheme and claim it back there. Try and have the conversation first with your tenant, explain to them why you're going to be requesting your deposit back, and keep the receipts, guys. Keep the receipts. Like, have the invoices and everything that you paid out to get the property back up to standard. Have that as evidence, so you can literally show your tenant and say, well, you know, I had to spend X amount clearing the property, I had to spend X amount cleaning the property, I had to spend X amount getting the property decorated and stuff. So once they see that itemized list and the money that you've spent, they can't dispute you needing that deposit back. So yeah, have that conversation with them first, because what I did, which I shouldn't have done, was go straight to DPS, try and request my deposit back. They obviously then need to go to the tenant and ask the tenant if they're okay with releasing the deposit. And because I hadn't communicated with the tenant first to say that I was going to be requesting the whole deposit back, they refused it straight away. And then I had to have a conversation with them. And I think that's why that conversation got as heated as it did on their end, because they were obviously in shock and surprised, and they didn't expect for me to be wanting my deposit back. But then after I'd had the conversation, explained to them, well, this is essentially why I need it back, because I've spent more money than even your deposit on getting the property back up to standard. So yeah, I was able to have that conversation, and fortunately I got the deposit back. That isn't always the case, and I'm really happy that I didn't have to go down like the legal route or anything like that. So yeah, that is the end of story time. I hope you found it useful, maybe interesting, maybe even funny at some points. Yeah, if you can't laugh at your own mistakes, I mean, you know, what can you laugh at, kind of thing. So yeah, I hope you found it interesting. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And do you know what? I want to hear about your experiences. If you've had any experiences with bad tenants, or even if you're a tenant, you've had an experience with a bad landlord, like, hit me up in the comment section, talk about it. Let's get a conversation going. Like, I'd be really interested to hear what other people are going through, because I can't be the only one going through this. I know that for sure. So yeah, give it a like. Be sure to subscribe. I put videos out on a weekly basis. Yeah, subscribe and hit the bell icon as well, so you can get notifications every time I post. Yeah, that's it for today, guys. I'll see you next week. Bye.